Thank you for tuning in to the Practical Preservation Podcast. Please take a moment to visit our website, practicalpreservationservices.com, for additional information and tips to help you restore your historical home. If you've not done so, please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and also like us on Facebook. Welcome to the Practical Preservation Podcast, hosted by Danielle and Jonathan Kepperling. Kepperling Preservation Services is a family-owned business based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, dedicated to the preservation of our built architectural history for today's use as well as future generations. Our weekly podcast provides you with expert advice specific to the unique needs of renovating a historic home, educating by sharing our From the Trenches preservation knowledge and our guests' expertise, balancing modern needs while maintaining the historical significance, character, and beauty of your period home.
So today on the Practical Preservation Podcast, I have Steve Larson here with me from Adelphi Paper Hangings. Steve, thanks for joining me.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about your background.
Well, my background came from a fine arts background. I studied ceramics in school, and toward the end of my time there, I began to work with paper mache and started covering the paper mache with what I thought of as old wallpaper from the 1950s and the 1960s. And so I continued to work with paper mache and wallpaper. And I'll jump back a little bit. My first experience or exposure to wallpaper was actually when I was quite young. My father managed a paint and wallpaper store. And so he would oftentimes bring home obsolete pattern books, and I got to cut those up. And of course we had a bit of wallpaper in the house, not surprisingly. And so I was always around wallpaper. But going back to the artwork, I worked with paper mache, wallpaper, and depending, I would have to find old wallpaper in small paint stores where they used to have old stock, and they would sell it to me for $1 a roll, and that was fine. But then I got to the point where I wanted to develop other patterns and colors, and I thought it would be good to learn how to print wallpaper. So coincidentally, about that time, I came across a project at the Farmers Museum in Cooperstown. And it's a project that my current business partner, Chris Orstrom, had set up, and they were demonstrating block printing wallpaper. And so I immediately latched onto that, and I started to work at the museum in the print shop there. And after a few years, Chris, who is well connected with restoration and renovation field, felt like there was enough interest in block printed wallpaper that it could be a business. So in 1999, we split off from the Farmers Museum and started Adelphi Paper Hangings. Paper hangings is simply the old word for wallpaper. It was used to differentiate it between paper and textiles, because quite oftentimes they would hang textiles.
Oh, yes, yeah.
So paper hangings were less expensive than textiles, and so it was the term used pretty much through the mid 19th century. So we started in 1999. The first year was largely just research and development, because there wasn't a lot of written information on block printing of wallpaper, especially in the U.S. There are companies in Europe that block print, a few of them, but there was not a lot of shared information, so we had to do a lot of experimenting.
So it was a lot of the wallpaper then in America. Was it imported? Was that, or was some of it manufactured here? The records just weren't available.
Well, as far as historic wallpapers go, I mean, the wallpapers up until the Revolutionary War were primarily imported and imported from England and some from France. But after the war, the American wallpaper industries began, and they were oftentimes they would copy or were highly inspired by European designs. And so they said, well, our papers, the American papers, were just as good as the English and the French papers, but cheaper. Well, they were usually cheaper, but the quality varied a little bit. I mean, they were just getting started.
Right.
But after the turn of the 19th century, the American industry really took off and just continued from there. Block printing was how papers were printed exclusively up until about 1840s or so.
Okay.
And then after the 1840s, machine printing took over. And
so is block printing like I don't want to call them stencils, but they kind of they're like the blocks of wood that you press the pattern on. Okay.
The blocks are it's really like large rubber stamps, and so we have all of the blocks made for us. The one major concession to modern technology is that our blocks are not hand carved; they're laser cut.
Okay.
If we were hand carving the blocks, we'd probably have a good 10 patterns by now.
Right.
I've done a little bit, and it takes a long time. So the old wallpaper factories, I mean, they had separate workshops just for carving blocks,
making the pattern.
And so our blocks are like I say, they're laser engraved.
Okay, well, and so we kind of talked a little bit about the history of the wall coverings and the different types of manufacturing. So you're still doing the block printing process.
That's all
Okay.
we do is block print. And
then do you compared it to rubber stamp, so that made me think about, like, do you then color the actual like stamp or the block then, or do you like hand color it in? Like
it's we have the printing press to the right side of the printing press itself. There's a large bin which has it has it has a frame with a flexible bottom on the frame, and this frame sits in a tub of water, so that felt is flexible, and you brush the paint into the felt, and then you tamp the block into the paint and lift the block off, put it on the paper, and then bring the printing mechanism over and apply pressure.
Yeah, very similar to like an ink pad. So I guess the idea of a rubber stamp is very it gives somebody who doesn't have experience with this an idea of how that works.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. So talk to me about the products and services that you offer.
Well, we offer wallpapers, patterns that are primarily historically from the golden age of block printing, which was 1740 to 1840, so a lot of the patterns that we have are of American origin. We have quite a few historic French patterns, as well as English patterns. So that's Yeah, that's all we do is just block print wallpaper.
Do you match, like if somebody would have a section of wallpaper that they found like behind, paint or something, would
Yeah,
you be able to
yeah,
match that?
yeah.
Okay.
And that's always can be sort of a challenge, especially if they don't have a complete section of the pattern, and and so we either have to extrapolate what may have been there, using examples of other similar patterns as a guide, or but we don't, we rather not fabricate things. We rather
Right.
have
Yeah.
the whole pattern.
So what's like the ideal size then? Like, is it like narrow, and like, I don't know what the dimensions would be like.
Yeah, well, it sort of depends. I mean,
Okay.
of course, there's some patterns that are, of course, quite small. Our Adina pin ring. That's one of our patterns that came from a historic site in Chillicothe, Ohio. They sent us a strip of wallpaper that had been behind the chair rail, and it was no more than 3 inches wide.
Right, chair rail's not very big.
No, but there was enough there that we could determine what the whole pattern was, because it's a series of circles and dots and little medallions, and so that was fairly easy to figure out what was there. And currently we're working on a pattern for Colonial Williamsburg that we weren't quite sure of the structure of the pattern, but there was one little spot on the pattern that gave us a hint as to how the whole thing fit together. There are several ways it could have gone together, but when we investigated it, we realized that it had to be set up in a certain way. So and that one was maybe 12 inches by 20 inches, so
Okay.
it wasn't too big.
Right.
There are other patterns like our most extravagant pattern is called Réveillon Arabesque number 600, and that has a 6-foot pattern repeat. And,
oh my goodness, that's really wide.
It's quite tall. Fortunately, there's a complete roll at the Cooper Hewitt Museum in New York City. So we used their roll to base our pattern on. And that one, like I say, that's rather our more extravagant pattern, because it's not only block printed, but there are many areas of color that are hand painted. And then the last thing is to apply gold leaf to certain areas. So that pattern we did for the DAR Museum in Washington. Took quite a while, so it sort of involved everyone here at the shop.
Oh, that sounds like it would. And then do you then go and install it also and make sure that everything lines up?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's no, installation is a whole nother field. And in fact, over the last couple of days, we've had calls from individuals who thought they had figured out how much paper they needed, and then they found out that they're one roll short. So you have to be careful when you're calculating how much you'll need. It always takes more than you think.
Well, that's what I was thinking. It's better to overestimate than to underestimate, because at least then you have it, and if something would happen, you have like a sample.
Oh yeah, and that's typically it's best to order 15% more than you'll need for the job, just in case there there is some damage later on, you have some to
Right.
replace it with.
And I don't know if this is a different type of, I was thinking about it when you were talking about the pattern that was 6 feet tall. I believe it was at Winter Tour, I saw like a whole mural. Is that a different type of printing process for the wallpaper?
No, it's just
Okay.
it's just a lot more involved, more complex. Yeah.
Okay, so it's similar.
And there is, I mean, the French company Zuber in France, well, the French company in France, they still block print their scenic papers using blocks that were carved in the early 19th century, and so they'll have thousands of blocks printing hundreds of colors. We're a shop of 5 people.
Right.
We can't do that.
No, and I would think that would take a lot of time, and a lot of people too, because or you'd have to devote yourself to just something that large.
Yeah. And the market for that is relatively small.
I would think it would be mostly the museums, but there might be.
Well, there's a lot of homeowners that are and designers that are still purchasing Zuber patterns.
Okay.
America in the 19th century was the largest client for the French scenic papers after France. So there was a lot of French scenic papers that ended up in the U.S. And in fact, it was a fragment of a scenic paper that Chris, my business partner, saw, and that got him really interested in block printed wallpaper. He had a small historic paints company, and he just happened to be snooping around in a old house that was being demolished and found this really bright fragment of a wallpaper, and that led him to investigate what this was all about. So we still have fun trying to figure out how to do things.
Yes. So you've mentioned a couple of your notable projects, but do you want to talk about a few more?
I mean, we're working on several things now. Let's see, we're working on some patterns for Mount Vernon. We've done a number, I think 4 or 5 rooms for Mount Vernon already, and they're working on a few more. We've done some patterns for James Madison's Montpelier. And then, like I say, the DAR Museum in Washington, D.C. has a number of our papers. Dumbarton House in Washington. Dundurn Castle in Ontario. We did a pattern for Sir John Soane's Museum in London, and that was an interesting project. They had found an entire wall of a pattern that they wanted reproduced, and we had to print our paper to match the exact size of the original one, and so that took a bit of calculation because when you apply paste to the wallpaper, it always expands.
Right.
So when we drafted the patterns, we had to actually draft it somewhat smaller just to allow for the expansion. And we did several papers for Strawberry Hill outside of London, and let's see, the Ulysses S. Grant Boyhood Home in Ohio, and of course we did the paper for the Lincoln bedroom at the White House some years ago.
Oh, very cool. Okay, so from your vantage point and what you see, what challenges or trends do you see in preservation?
Well, I think the challenges for us are really just like I say, those when we're working on specific projects to have complete patterns to work with.
Right.
The overall restoration field, I'm not that well versed in
Right.
what's out there. Most of our clients have either been historic sites or designers working on contemporary homes. We've had some private individuals with historic homes that have purchased paper, but that is not a large section of our clientele.
Right. And that makes sense to me, because I would think the historic sites are trying to, take it back to the time period of significance.
Yeah.
And the designers know what's out there and usually have clients that are willing to kind of push the boundaries a little bit beyond what people usually have in their homes. So that
Yeah.
makes sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, we enjoy working with the designers, especially if they take advantage of our custom coloring. And because they don't necessarily want to use those historic colors, they want to try new ones. And some designers will take the historic patterns and make them quite muted. And other designers we have they go crazy. I mean, which is great. I mean, we like to do custom coloring because when you change the colors in a pattern, it changes the overall effect of the design. And so it's interesting to see other people's perspectives.
Yes. Yeah. I would think that it would be something different too. So you're not just replicating the same thing over and over again.
No.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, we have, I think, maybe 102, 105 sidewall patterns, but of those, there's probably 20 that we will sell on a regular basis. And there's others that we sell once in a while. And then there's a few that we really like, but they've never sold. And for us, I mean, that's one challenge, is to try to determine what patterns are going to be marketable,
Right.
Because it's not always the ones that we like. And so quite often the patterns that we add to our line are ones that someone has commissioned us to do. Like a historic site will say, well, we found this pattern and we want to have it reproduced. And so we will give them two sets of prices. One set of prices for the pattern if it's exclusively for them, and another set of prices where if they allow us to license the pattern from them, then we will take over part of the cost of having the blocks made,
Right.
and they will receive a royalty for any subsequent sales.
Oh, that's really seems like a win-win for the historic site.
Yeah, I mean that's always good for them. So
yeah.
And we've worked quite a bit with both historic New England and Boston, and the Cooper Hewitt Museum, and Colonial Williamsburg, and then lots of small institutions, but historic New England and the Cooper Hewitt both had very extensive wallpaper collections, and so that's always a good source for patterns.
Yeah. Well, and you get to see their collections too, which I'm sure helps you with some of your pattern work.
But we always like to work with, when we're developing a pattern, we like to have the actual historic paper. Although sometimes we have to work from a photograph that's been printed to scale. But to be able to actually see the paper and see the paint, even if it's faded, it gives us a better sense of what it was historically.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So is there anything that you wanted to cover that we didn't get a chance to talk about, or that I didn't ask you?
That covers quite a bit of it.
Okay.
I mean, our website, Adelphi Paper Hangings.com. Remember the S on the hangings.
Yes.
There is a video on the opening page of the website, and that shows the process, and which really helps explain what it is that block printing is all about.
Yeah, very good. We'll make sure that we have that on our site where we host the podcast, so that if somebody needs to find your website from there, we can, sometimes it's a little bit easier. Okay. And then is there any other way that someone should contact you?
Go to the website, and there's a link for asking questions about papers and how to order. Designers can work with several of the showrooms that we work with, and the showrooms are also listed on the website. And I suppose one thing that I would want to emphasize is, people say, well, why is block printing so different than anything else? Block printing of wallpaper, the final result is you get a much better sense of paint on paper. It's not that it's textured, but it's a very physical, has a very physical presence. And because of the kind of paint that we use, it's a very matte paint. Light is absorbed into the paint, and it has a very rich surface appearance, which is very, very different from either screen printing or digital printing, which they can do other things, but if you're reproducing an historic pattern, block printing really gives you a better sense of the historic.
Well,
product.
Yeah, I would think it's because it's not really textured, but it's a depth, because you actually are like putting multiple layers on. You're not just imprinting.
Yeah.
So very, very, very interesting. Do you have, if someone was interested, do you have samples that would be on the website?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Samples, small samples, business envelope size. Those are free of charge. Just send their address, and then larger samples, 12 inches cut from a roll. Those are $15 each.
Very, and I think that would be important too, to see, to touch and see, to really get the understanding. So that's a good something. Good.
And like I say, custom coloring is always available. So
and you like the bright colors, so
yeah. But we offer, most patterns have 4 different colorways. The first colorway is always the historic one, and then the second colorway uses colors that were appropriate for that time period, and the other 2 colorways are usually more contemporary. But even with that, of course, someone may not. It may not work with someone's interior, and so we can work with them and customize the pattern for them.
Very, very, very good. Well, I thank you so much for coming on today. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Well, I did too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Practical Preservation Podcast. The resources discussed during this episode are on our website at practicalpreservationservices.com/podcast. If you received value from this episode and know someone else that will get value from it as well, please share it with them. Join us next week for another episode of the Practical Preservation Podcast. For more information on restoring your historic home, visit practicalpreservationservices.com.